Hello and welcome to a special edition of Paul on Politics, dedicated to the single most important vote in a generation, the EU referendum. I'm stood outside one of the centres of an institution that divides political and public opinion more than any other, the European Parliament in Strasbourg. So this coming June, for the first time in 40 years, voters in Kent will get their chance to have their say on whether we stay part of the EU club or strike out for independence. And as the gateway to Europe, the stakes are high for Kent. So should we stay or should we leave? Ben Kennedy has been looking at the arguments for and against.
On June the 23rd, Kent will help answer a question that's been rumbling on for decades. We all know what the government thinks we should do after most of us had these please stay leaflets popped through our letterboxes. But with the likes of Ukip rising in popularity over recent years, a question mark hangs over our future here. There are countless arguments for both Leave and Remain camps. But here's what we think are some of the key issues you should be thinking about on referendum day. In the EU, we have a single market. Kent businesses can export and import goods between member states without having to pay a tariff. If we choose to leave, we may lose that cast iron guarantee. But Eurosceptics argue that the vast majority of Kent businesses don't trade with the EU anyway, yet are still burdened by their pages of rules and regulations. Thanks to the EU and the principle of the freedom of movement, I've been able to come here to Strasbourg very easily with very little pre-planning or interruption. I simply bought a ticket from Ashford on the day, showed them my passport and got on the train. But leavers are saying that the principle of freedom of movement and open borders leaves us more vulnerable to security threats. The cost of keeping our membership card to this place isn't cheap. Last year, Britain paid £13 billion to the EU budget. So if we left, the government could see immediately more cash in its pocket. But others would argue that's too simple a way of looking at it, that we should consider what we save through free trade and the millions Kent has received in EU grants. On KentOnline, we have revealed several organised crime operations that could have been busted thanks to EU states sharing criminal and passenger records. But those campaigning to get out argue that an independent Britain would have greater powers to stop the criminals getting in the first place. So, for every claim made by one side, there seems to be an equally valid counterclaim made by the other, leaving many of us baffled as to what is best for Kent and the UK. It is confusing, but it is a big decision. Ben Kennedy, KMTV in Strasbourg.
Are you planning to stay in or go out?
Go out.
Go out, and why's that?
Because I think there's too many people in the country.
There's been a lot of talk about what the benefits we could get while we're out, but no one seems to know what exactly will happen. There doesn't seem to be any guarantees.
In. Yeah, definitely. I think people just got the wrong idea about what the EU does for us. There's so much that it brings to this country, like in terms of our trade, exports and imports.
So, things may seem simple, but as everyone knows from mythical stories about bent bananas, the European Union is never as straightforward as that. We brought together two South East MEPs to argue their case, and it got a bit feisty. Well, I'm joined by Daniel Hannan, the Conservative MEP for the South East, and Catherine Bearder, Liberal Democrat MEP for the South East. Now, Dan, why would Kent be better off if we left the European Union?
Well, Kent would be better off in the most literal sense, the financial sense. Britain as a whole pays in £19 billion a year gross, 11 billion net to the EU. But that figure is higher for Kent. Kent pays in more as a relatively affluent part of the UK and with customs duties, and gets back relatively less. So to put this in context, we gave the EU more than we saved in the whole of the austerity programme in the last Parliament. Actually, we'd have had enough to wipe out all the cuts and still take a penny off income tax.
I'm sure you've got a different view, Catherine Bearder. You'd like Kent as the gateway Europe to stay in place where it is.
Absolutely. It is where we know that we will have a stronger economy. Dan has talked about the figures and that proportionately what people of Kent pay in, but they pay that in because we are such a dynamo of an economy. We have the Port of Dover. Anybody who's seen the lorries coming and going from either the train or the boats will know that we are a really important part of the European economy. We cut ourselves off from that, then our economy takes a nosedive.
Is it a risk too far? Is it a leap too far, Dan Hannan?
Well, I mean, there are quite a lot of risks with staying in. People need to ask, what are the negative consequences of a Remain vote, where you are acquiescing in everything that's coming our way, inviting the EU to carry on legislating more. Catherine just mentioned the Port of Dover. That's a very good example. The Port of Dover, like every other port, is threatened by the EU's Ports Services Directive that was suspended until after the UK referendum. Every British MEP voted against it, and we were outvoted, and it's the last thing we need.
That is a directive for state-owned ports. We are not a state-owned port in Dover or in Southampton, so we will be excluded. And Daniel, if you did your job here in the Parliament and actually attended committee meetings, we would have a voice.
Hang on, what you're saying is just not true.
No,
what you're saying is not true. We moved an amendment to exempt private ports, and it was defeated.
Perhaps you would just let me get a word in. You say that we are bossed around by Europe. We are not. We are here in the European Union, standing up. We as MEPs are here representing the people of Kent in all those decisions. We are affecting legislation in 28 different countries. Outside the European Union, we would be shouting on the white cliffs of Dover saying, and us, and us.
Although the Stay campaign group, the message seems to be, our economy would benefit. But we're a strong economy already, so why can't we stand on our own 2 feet?
We are a strong economy because we have those trading links with the European Union. We are culturally stronger, where the young people can travel, older people can retire, we can move about. The traffic and the flow across Europe is enormous, and that gives us huge benefit. You ask any farmer that's relying on fruit pickers to come and help him out. You look at the hospitals, how many of those doctors and nurses come from other European countries?
It is true, Dan Hannan, isn't it, that a lot of migrant workers fill gaps in the job market which wouldn't get filled if we had to fill.
And I think that should continue. I think it's really important that we have an element of free movement of labour, but we should be ultimately in control. And I think what people, particularly in Kent, which has been on the front line in terms of migration, which has had the hostels and so on, what people really resent is not immigration, right? We've always had immigration in this country. We've always accepted that we can be refreshed and enriched by the energy of people coming from elsewhere. But we want to feel that we are in charge of roughly who comes in and roughly in what numbers. And that's what we don't have as long as we're in the EU.
We are in charge. We are not in the Schengen Agreement. Nobody can get into our country unless they have a passport.
People generally don't like change that they don't know what the consequences of it will be. What would you say to those people who feel it's a risk too far? Because that's obviously an issue for the for the Leave camp.
Oh, sure. I mean, the other side are making it all about fear. That's the one card they're playing. There are risks and uncertainties whatever we do, right? If we stay in, what are our budget contributions going to be 5-10 years from now? How many migrants will we have had to have taken? How many more Euro bailouts will we have been dragged into? There are lots of uncertainties if we vote to stay in. The one certainty is that a country in control of its own borders, its own taxes, its own money, its own destiny is safer.
We would be isolated. We have right of access. It's access all areas. We can trade anywhere within the European Union.
Carry on. What you mean is that our jobs will disappear. That's what's
Daniel,
bothering you.
keep interrupting me.
Catherine, I'll give you the final word, which won't obviously be the final word because we've got some time to go before the outcome. But
yeah, we have lots of words, and I think it is confusing for people who haven't understood or taken or even bothered with the European issue.
So what's your message to those people?
So my message is find out what are the things that really interest you. Find out if it's fashion or it's farming or it's music or whatever it is that interests you. Find out how that would be affected. We have no knowledge of what would happen. It's the people like Daniel are like lemmings that want to run off the cliff. I know that I am working here for the people of Kent and making life better for them. The people I speak to want to know that their future is secure, safe and prosperous, and we will only have that if we are full members of the European Union.
I'm voting inside in the EU.
Oh, why is that?
I think benefit-wise, we don't have to pay visa when we travel.
Oh, leave.
To leave. And why is that?
Costs too much money.
I'm voting to stay in the EU. I think it's good for the country, it's good for the UK and all the other countries involved.
Ukip has forced the debate about our future in Europe more than any other party, and Kent has become something of a powerhouse for it. We spoke to Diane James, the South East MEP and party spokesman on Justice and Home Affairs, about migration, migrant camps and whether leaving this place behind would compromise our border controls. It's perhaps a natural instinct of people to be unsure about taking a leap into what some people see as the unknown, and in a sense that might count against you in the eventual outcome.
I don't agree with this phrase of leaping into the dark. You know, leaping into the dark goes both ways. Nobody who, in terms of promoting the Remain campaign, has been able to actually outline what 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years is going to be like further down the line if we stay in the European Union. We've actually started, in terms of my side of the equation, the levers, we're actually saying, look, here we can give you some degree of detail as to what is coming down the line.
We know that a lot of the jobs that are filled in areas of the health service are as a result of migrants taking up those positions. If you lock down the borders in the way UKIP suggests you might do, isn't it going to be more difficult to fill those kind of jobs that people over here don't want?
No, not at all. I mean, the point that UKIP made, even with our general election manifesto, was to recognise where we've currently got shortages in terms of key personnel in the NHS. We also fully took on board the degree of immigrant, migrant, whatever you want to call it, visitor expertise that contributes to the running of the NHS. What we have never ever suggested is that people already employed in the NHS are suddenly going to lose their jobs and going to be asked to return to their countries. We have never suggested that. I know that some organisations, for some sick reason, no pun intended, think that that's what they would like to imagine we've said. But what we are very, very focused on is if we are going to try and achieve a balanced migration figure into the United Kingdom, what we do have to do is prioritise where we have skills shortages.
Finally, the polls are a bit all over the place, but in general they seem to suggest more people would support staying than remaining. I mean, there's a lot at stake and a lot to fight for. How do you think it's going to come out of the end?
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you there. Of the last 3 polls that I've seen in the last 10 days, 2 have put exit, as in leaving, slightly ahead, and only 1 put remain in the lead position. It is very fluid, that's what I will agree to.
Diane James, thank you very much for joining us today.
No problem at all.
So the arguments about whether we should stay or go can be bewildering. But while we try and sometimes fail to grasp all the details, one thing can't be denied. This is a momentous vote. The outcome will have an impact on our lives for generations to come. It's a serious debate, as important for people as it is for politicians. Ultimately, it might be a matter of head versus heart. We'll find out on June the 23rd. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.